The city of Varenhold never really slept. Even past midnight, the streets were busy with noise and light. Cargo ships rumbled low in the sky above the rooftops. Street vendors sold hot food from small carts. Aliens of a dozen different species moved through the neon-lit streets, going about their business without caring much about anyone else. It was that kind of city. Big, loud, and very good at ignoring things that were not its problem. Owen Marsh was used to it. He was 29 years old, average height, with tired eyes and worn boots and the kind of face that nobody looked at twice. He worked the late shift at a cargo depot near the lower docks, loading, sorting, checking manifests, doing it all over again. It was not exciting work. But it paid his rent and kept his fridge half full, and Owen had long ago decided that was enough. Every night after his shift ended, he walked home the same way. Down Crestline Avenue, left at the Broken Fountain, then through the narrow alley behind 7th Market. The alley saved him 10 minutes and he liked the quiet of it. No street vendors, no crowds, no noise. Just wet stone walls and the distant hum of the city on either side. Tonight, the rain had started just as he left the depot. He pulled his jacket tighter and kept his head down. The rain was cold and steady, the kind that soaked through everything slowly and made the whole world smell like wet metal. His boots were already damp by the time he turned into the alley. He was about halfway through when he stopped. There was something on the ground near the base of a rusted water pipe. At first he thought it was a bag. A piece of discarded packing material, maybe, or an old coat someone had thrown away. He almost kept walking. But something made him slow down. A small sound, thin and broken, barely audible under the noise of the rain. Owen turned his head. He stepped closer and crouched down. It was a dragon hatchling. Small, no bigger than a large dog, curled tightly against the pipe as if trying to press itself into the wall and disappear. Its scales, which should have been bright and vivid with the rich color of a healthy young dragon, were pale and dull. Almost gray. The color had washed out of them the way color washes out of something left too long in the cold. Its sides moved up and down too fast, each breath shallow and unsteady. Owen stayed very still for a moment. He had seen dragon hatchlings before, usually from a distance, usually with their parents nearby, usually moving fast and curious and full of energy the way young things always were. He had never seen one like this. Alone. So, barely holding on. He reached out slowly and held the back of his hand near the hatchling's nose. The breath that came out against his skin was burning hot. Not warm the way a healthy animal felt warm. Hot. Dangerously, wrongly hot. The hatchling's one visible eye opened slightly. It was glassy and unfocused, struggling to track Owen's face. The sound it made was not a growl. It was too weak for a growl. It was something smaller and sadder than that, something that landed somewhere in Owen's chest and stayed there. He looked up and down the alley. Empty in both directions. No signs. No tags on the hatchling. No guardian, no parent, nothing to suggest this little creature belonged to anyone or anywhere nearby. Just a sick, small thing alone in the rain in a city that was very good at looking the other way. Owen looked back down at it. He did not think about it for very long. He unzipped his jacket, pulled it off, and wrapped it carefully around the hatchling, gently, the way you would wrap something fragile. The hatchling flinched at the first touch and then went still. Owen tucked the jacket around it firmly, making sure the small body was covered, and then he slid both hands underneath and lifted. It was heavier than it looked. Solid and warm, too warm, against his chest. Its tiny claws came out instinctively and caught in the fabric of his shirt. Not a scratch. Not a threat. Just a weak, automatic grip, the kind of grip that meant, don't let go. Owen didn't. He stood up straight in the rain, the hatchling held firmly against his chest with both arms and took a slow breath. He had no car. He was in the middle of an alley behind 7th Market at midnight in the pouring rain, holding a dragon hatchling that was clearly very sick. The nearest animal clinic, he already knew, closed at 10. He pulled out his phone with one hand and checked quickly. The Dragon Medical Facility was listed as open overnight, but it was on the east side of Varenhold. A long way from here. He did the math without enjoying it. Then he put his phone away, shifted the hatchling carefully so its head rested against his shoulder, and started walking. All right, he said quietly, more to fill the silence than anything else. Let's get you somewhere warm. The hatchling did not respond. But its claws stayed hooked in his shirt. The rain came down harder. Owen walked. He was 3 blocks from the alley, head down against the rain, when a figure stepped out of the shadows of a closed shop front across the street. She was tall. Dressed in a long dark coat with the hood pulled up and forward, hiding most of her face. She moved without sound, which was unusual on wet pavement. She crossed to the opposite side of the street and fell into step roughly a block behind Owen, matching his pace exactly. She did not hurry. She did not call out. She simply walked, hands at her sides, head slightly tilted, eyes fixed on the figure ahead of her with an expression hidden entirely beneath the shadow of her hood. Only her eyes caught the light from a passing street lamp for just a moment. Gold. Fully gold. Steady and unblinking and very old. She watched Owen adjust his grip on the hatchling, tilting it slightly so his shoulder blocked more of the rain. Watched him pull the edges of the jacket higher around the small pale body with one careful hand. Watched him say something quiet that she was just too far away to hear. Her pace did not change. But something in the set of her shoulders shifted. Almost nothing, barely visible. The way something shifts in a person when they see something they did not expect and are not yet sure what to do with. She stayed one block behind. Owen walked on through the rain, completely unaware of the golden eyes watching him from the dark, talking softly to a sick little creature that could not talk back, and the city of Varenhold moved around him, loud and indifferent and paying no attention at all to the quiet thing happening in its streets. The hatchling's claws held on. Owen kept walking. The rain did not let up. If anything, it came down harder as Owen moved away from the alley and into the wider streets of Varenhold. The wind had picked up too, pushing cold air through the gaps between buildings and cutting right through his shirt. He had given his jacket to the hatchling and was already regretting it in the way your body regrets things before your brain does. A slow, deep chill working its way up from his arms and settling across his shoulders. He ignored it and kept walking. The hatchling was pressed against his chest, wrapped in the jacket, its small body radiating heat that should have been comforting but was instead alarming. It was too hot. The kind of heat that meant something inside was burning that should not be burning. Owen kept one hand flat against its back and felt the fast, unsteady rise and fall of its breathing. Not steady enough. Not slow enough. He pulled out his phone again and checked the map. 4 kilometers to the Dragon Medical Facility on the east side. 45 minutes on foot, maybe 50 in the rain. He looked at the hatchling. Looked at the map. Put his phone away. He started talking. It was not something he planned. It just happened, the way things happen when you are doing something hard and the silence makes it harder. He talked about his shift. About the cargo manifest that the system had rejected 3 times for no reason he could find until he noticed someone had entered the weight unit wrong, kilograms instead of grams, which made one crate appear to weigh as much as a small building. He talked about the soup he had eaten at the small place near the depot, the one run by the old Sarati woman who always gave him extra broth without being asked. He talked about the rain and how he had meant to check the weather before leaving and had not. The hatchling said nothing, obviously. But its breathing seemed to even out slightly, just slightly, and its claws stayed curled in his shirt. So Owen kept talking. The streets of Varenhold at this hour were strange and half-empty. The bright, crowded parts of the city were behind him now. Out here, closer to the eastern districts, the buildings were older and the street lights were spaced further apart. Puddles sat wide and dark between the paving stones. A few late-night food stalls were still open, their lights warm and orange in the wet dark, but the vendors barely looked up as he passed. Nobody offered help. A group of Sarati traders moved past on the opposite side of the street without glancing over. 2 tall gray-skinned beings stopped and stared openly at Owen and the bundle in his arms, said something to each other in a language he didn't know and moved on. An alien shopkeeper stepped out of his doorway, saw the pale hatchling and went straight back inside. Owen heard the lock click from the pavement. He did not stop. He was about 15 minutes into the walk, somewhere along the stretch of road that ran behind the old Eastern Market, when he heard quick footsteps behind him. Hey, human. Owen slowed and looked back. A young dragon was standing on the pavement a few meters behind him. Adolescent maybe, young enough that his scales still had the slightly rough texture of an animal that hadn't fully grown into itself yet. They were rust-orange, rain-darkened, and his eyes were wide and alert in a nervous sort of way. He was staring at the bundle in Owen's arms. Is that a hatchling? The young dragon said. Yes, Owen said. It's it. Do you know? Let me see it. Owen turned fully so the young dragon could see the hatchling's face. The hatchling's scales were still pale, that washed-out, wrong-colored gray, and its jaw was slack, its eyes barely open. The young dragon's expression changed immediately. His nervous energy went tight and still, the way a person goes still when they recognize something bad. Those patches, he said, pointing at the dull gray areas near the hatchling's jaw and throat. That color. That scale fever. I was told that already, Owen said. By someone else. What does it mean exactly? The young dragon hesitated. That hesitation said more than his words did. "It's dangerous in hatchlings," he said. "Their bodies can't manage it the way older dragons can. If it's already showing in the scales like that." He stopped. Started again. "A few hours. Maybe less if it got too cold." Owen looked down at the hatchling. Its eyes were closed now. The breathing was still there, shallow but present, and the claws were still in his shirt. Still holding on. He pressed his hand a little firmer against its back. "Dragon Medical Facility on the east side," Owen said. "That's the right place?" "Yes, but how far am I?" "About 3 kilometers still, but..." Owen was already walking again. "Wait," the young dragon started. Owen looked back over his shoulder. "Thank you. I mean that." The young dragon stood on the pavement in the rain, opening and closing his mouth slightly. He looked at the hatchling. He looked at Owen's back getting smaller in the distance. He looked around at the empty street as though hoping someone else would appear and take over. Nobody did. He did not follow. Owen turned back around and kept moving, adjusting the hatchling so it sat higher against his chest, tilting his own body forward slightly to block more of the rain with his shoulders. The cold had worked its way fully through his shirt now. He could feel it in his arms when he moved. He ignored that too. He told the hatchling about the terrible joke he had heard from one of the dock workers that morning, something about a cargo container and a very confused customs officer that did not quite land because the person telling it always forgot the middle part. Owen told it anyway, filling in the middle part himself. It was still not a good joke. But the hatchling's tiny claws tightened slightly against his shirt as he told it, and Owen decided that counted as a response. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I know. Not great. I'll work on it." 1 block behind, the hooded woman walked in silence. She had heard the conversation with the young dragon. Had watched the young dragon hesitate, look around, and ultimately do nothing. Had watched Owen process the words, "a few hours, maybe less," and then keep walking without slowing down, without cursing, without any visible sign of panic. Just a small adjustment of his grip and a firmer press of his hand against the hatchling's back. Her eyes had not left him since the alley. She watched the way he angled his body in the wind to shield the hatchling. Watched him tuck the jacket edges higher with his chin when his hands were both occupied. Watched him talk, constantly, quietly, a low and steady stream of words that she was just too far away to fully hear, and she knew from things she understood about young dragons that most humans did not, that the sound of a calm voice was one of the few things that could slow a fever response in a hatchling this young. He did not know that. He was just talking because the silence felt wrong. Her jaw was tight beneath the hood. She did not close the distance. Owen's route took him through a stretch of road that ran alongside a row of shuttered buildings, their windows dark, their doorways empty. The rain bounced off the pavement in small white bursts and the street lights turned everything the color of old copper. It was the kind of street that felt longer than it was, the kind where you kept looking ahead expecting to see the end of it and never quite did. Owen looked ahead. He did not slow down. He talked to the hatchling about the soup again, because he had genuinely enjoyed it and felt it deserved more discussion. He talked about the fact that he had been meaning to get a better rain jacket for about 2 years now and had never gotten around to it. He talked about nothing in particular, in the steady, low voice of someone who understood that the words did not matter, only the sound did. Only the warmth. Only the fact of being there. The hatchling breathed. Shallow. Too fast. But present. Its claws held on. And Owen walked on through the rain, cold and tired and soaked through, 3 kilometers still to go, 1 block ahead of golden eyes that had stopped being unreadable somewhere on that long wet road and had become something else entirely. Something that looked, very quietly, like shame. The Dragon Medical Facility on the east side of Varenhold was a large gray building set back from the road behind a short row of iron posts. Its sign glowed pale blue in the rain. The words were written in 3 languages, dragon script at the top, then the common trade language, then human text at the bottom, smallest of the 3. Owen had never been here before. He pushed through the front doors with his shoulder, keeping both arms around the hatchling, and stepped into the light. The waiting room was big and busy and very loud after the quiet of the rainy street. The seats were wide and built for many different body shapes, some low and flat, some tall and narrow, some with extra space for tails or wings. Most of them were full. Different species sat in different corners of the room, not mixing much, everyone dealing with their own problems and paying no attention to anyone else. The air was warm. Owen stood still for just a moment and let the warmth hit him. His shirt was soaked through and his arms were stiff with cold, and he had not noticed either of those things properly until right now. He exhaled slowly. The hatchling stirred slightly against his chest. Not a good stir, not the kind that meant it was getting better. just a faint, restless movement, like something shifting in uneasy sleep. Owen walked straight to the reception desk. The receptionist was a Verith. They were a broad, gray-skinned species, thick-shouldered, slow-moving, with flat expressions that rarely changed regardless of what was happening in front of them. This one was seated behind a tall desk, looking at a screen, entering something with 4 steady fingers. It did not look up when Owen approached. "Excuse me," Owen said. The Verith finished what it was typing. Then it looked up with the flat, unhurried expression of someone who had processed thousands of difficult situations and felt nothing particular about any of them anymore. Its eyes moved to the hatchling. Then back to Owen. "Guardian documentation," it said. Not a question. A prompt. "I don't have any," Owen said. "I found it. It was alone in an alley on the west side. It has scale fever. It needs to be seen now." The Verith looked at the hatchling again, a brief, clinical look, and then turned back to its screen. "Without Guardian documentation, unregistered hatchlings are categorized as non-priority intake," it said in the flat tone of someone reading from a page they had memorized a long time ago. "Current estimated wait time is," it checked its screen, 2 hours and 50 minutes. Owen was quiet for a moment. "It may not have 2 hours and 50 minutes, he said. His voice was calm. Completely calm. "The hatchling has scale fever. It has been in cold rain for over an hour. Someone told me on the street that this condition in hatchlings can become fatal within a few hours. I need someone to look at it now. Policy does not allow." "I'm not asking about policy," Owen said. "I'm asking for a doctor." The Verith looked at him with its flat expression and said that a doctor could not be requested outside of the standard intake process. That the standard intake process required documentation. That without documentation the wait was 2 hours and 50 minutes and that was simply how it worked. Owen looked at the Verith for a long moment. Then he said, "All right," and turned away from the desk. He found an empty seat in the far corner of the waiting room, away from the main clusters of other species, with a wall on one side and a clear view of the rest of the room on the other. He sat down carefully, keeping the hatchling against his chest and settled back against the wall. The waiting room moved around him. A family of tall, blue-feathered beings argued quietly near the door. A heavy-set creature with 6 legs paced a slow circle near the window. 2 small reptilian beings sat very close together in the corner opposite Owen, one with its head resting on the other's shoulder. Nobody looked at Owen. Nobody looked at the hatchling. Owen looked down. The hatchling's scales were still that wrong, washed-out gray. Its breathing was fast and uneven. Its eyes were closed. But its claws, those small, weak claws, were still hooked into his shirt. Still holding on the way it had been holding on since the alley. Owen put one hand flat on its back and began rubbing slowly. Small, steady circles. He did not think much about why he did it, it just seemed like the right thing. The hatchling made a very faint sound and went slightly still under his hand like it had noticed. He kept going. The minutes passed. Owen watched the room without staring at anyone. He watched the door open and close as new patients came in. Watched the Verith receptionist process each one with the same flat efficiency. Watched a young dragon couple get taken through to the back relatively quickly, they had documentation clearly. Watched an older, heavy-set alien wait patiently and then get called with no fuss. He watched the clock on the wall across from him. 20 minutes passed. The hatchling's breathing did not improve. If anything, it had gotten slightly more uneven, a small hitch in the rhythm that had not been there before. Owen felt it under his hand and his jaw tightened very slightly. He kept the circles going. Kept his body still and his breathing even. He did not let the tight feeling in his chest move anywhere it would show. An elderly dragon woman sat down in the seat beside him. She was small and slow-moving, with deep green scales that had faded to a soft silver gray at the edges, the color of very old things that had once been bright. She settled into the seat with the careful, deliberate movements of someone whose joints had opinions about chairs, and then she looked at the hatchling with eyes that were calm and very attentive. She did not speak for a moment. Then she said quietly, "You are holding it correctly." Owen looked at her. "The warmth from a warm-blooded body slows the fever response," she said. "Not much, but enough to matter. And the pressure," she nodded at his hand on the hatchling's back, "helps with the breathing. Keeps the muscles from tightening too much." "I didn't know that," Owen said. "I just thought it needed to be warm." The old woman was quiet for a moment. She looked at the hatchling's face. Then at Owen's face. Then she nodded, one slow, deliberate nod that felt like it meant more than a nod usually meant. "How long has it been this pale?" she asked. "I don't know," Owen said. "It was like this when I found it." That was about an hour and a half ago. She made a soft sound that was not a good sound. Then it needs to be seen soon, she said. Not in 2 hours. Soon. I know, Owen said. She looked at him steadily. Are you going to go back to that desk? Yes, Owen said. In a few minutes. She nodded again. Then she folded her hands in her lap and said nothing more and simply sat beside him. Not leaving, not making a fuss. Just present, in the quiet and solid way that very old people sometimes are. Owen kept his hand moving in slow circles. 10 more minutes passed. The hitch in the hatchling's breathing came again, and this time it was followed by a small, weak sound. Not a cry exactly. Just a sound that meant something was wrong and the small body that was making it had very little left to use. Owen felt it. He stopped rubbing. He held the hatchling a little firmer. He looked at it for a moment, at the pale scales, at the claws still hooked in his shirt, at the small side still rising and falling with too much effort. Then he stood up. He walked across the waiting room. Not fast. Not in a way that looked like panic. Just steady and straight, the way a person walks when they have made a decision and the decision is not going to change. He put both hands flat on the reception desk. The Verith looked up. Owen looked at it calmly and said, quietly, clearly, without any heat in his voice at all. I am not leaving this desk until someone sees this hatchling. I don't have documents. I don't have guardian status. I don't have anything except a sick child that I pulled out of an alley in the rain. You can call security if you want. I will explain the situation to them. But I am not moving. The Verith opened its mouth. Behind Owen, across the waiting room, a chair scraped slowly back against the floor. Footsteps. Quiet ones. The kind that barely made a sound on wet tile. The Verith's eyes moved past Owen's shoulder. And its color changed. The Verith receptionist's color did not change slowly. It changed all at once. A fast, draining shift from gray to something closer to white, the way a face goes when the blood leaves it too quickly. Its 4 fingers stopped moving over the keyboard. Its mouth, which had been opened to deliver another line about policy and documentation, closed without making a sound. Owen noticed. He turned around. The hooded woman was standing in the middle of the waiting room. She had pushed her hood back. Owen's first impression was simply that she was tall. Taller than he had registered when she was seated, taller than most people in the room. Her hair was silver white, straight, falling past her shoulders. Her face was sharp and very still, the kind of stillness that was not emptiness but control. Everything held in place deliberately, carefully, like a hand keeping pressure on something. Then he saw the scales. Along her jaw. Down the side of her neck, disappearing beneath the collar of her dark coat. Deep gold, each one catching the clinic light with a faint luminous quality, like metal that held heat. Not hidden exactly, but not displayed either. Just there, the way a part of someone simply is. And her eyes. Fully gold. No white around them, no pupil visible. Just gold, steady and burning and carrying in them a depth that did not belong to anything young. These were eyes that had seen a very long time pass. They were not unkind. But they were not soft either. The waiting room had gone completely silent. Not the natural quiet of people pausing what they were doing. Something deeper than that. The kind of silence that falls when every living thing in a space registers at the same moment that something significant is present. The family of blue-feathered beings near the door had stopped mid-sentence. The heavy 6-legged creature near the window had gone absolutely still. The 2 small reptilian beings in the corner were sitting upright, their earlier tiredness gone entirely. Even the background noise of the building seemed to drop. The 2 security guards near the side door, large, armored, the kind of beings employed specifically because nothing usually made them hesitate, took 1 step forward out of trained reflex. Then stopped. Then stepped back. One of them lowered his head. Owen looked at the security guards. Looked at the receptionist. Looked at the rest of the room. Then he looked back at the woman standing in the middle of it all, who had not moved and was not looking at any of them. She was looking at the Verith receptionist. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. When she spoke, her voice was quiet and level, but it had a quality to it that Owen could not quite name. Not loudness. Not threat exactly. More like weight. The way certain words land differently when the person saying them has never once in their life needed to repeat themselves. The hatchling, she said, will be seen now. Any further delay will be reviewed personally by my office before the end of this week. That is not a warning. It is information. That was all she said. The receptionist was already reaching for the intercom before she finished the last word. Within 90 seconds, 3 medical staff came through the back door at a pace that was not quite running but was as close to running as people get when they are trying to look professional while being genuinely alarmed. A doctor, a tall, pale-scaled dragon in a white coat, came with them, snapping on gloves as he walked. Owen turned from the woman and met the doctor at the desk. He transferred the hatchling carefully, keeping his hands under it until he was certain the doctor had a proper grip, making sure the jacket stayed wrapped around the small body, watching the doctor's hands and the hatchling's face at the same time until the handoff was fully done. Then he stepped back and exhaled. It was a long, slow exhale, the kind that carries something out with it that had been held tight for a long time. His shoulders dropped slightly. He stood in the middle of the waiting room floor with his soaked shirt and his cold arms and his empty hands, and for a moment he just breathed. The doctor and staff moved quickly through the back door with the hatchling. The door swung shut. The waiting room was still very quiet. Owen became aware, gradually, that the tall woman was standing a few meters away and looking at him. He looked back at her. "It is stable for now," she said. "They will work quickly." "Thank you," Owen said. He meant it simply, the way he said most things. Then after a short pause he said, "You were following me." It was not an accusation. His voice had no particular heat in it. He said it the way you state something that has become obvious, plainly, without drama. The woman said nothing. "The whole walk," Owen said. "From the alley, I think. Maybe before that." He tilted his head slightly. "I noticed someone keeping pace with me around the second kilometer. I thought it was just someone walking the same direction. But the same distance the whole time, the same pace, that's not coincidence." Pause. "You noticed," she said. There was something in the way she said it, not quite surprise but something adjacent to it. As if she had not expected that and was adjusting quietly. "Eventually," Owen said. He looked at her steadily. "You could have helped earlier. At the desk just now, or during the walk even. 30 minutes earlier and the hatchling wouldn't have been in that waiting room getting worse in a plastic chair." He said it without sharpness. Without anger. Just honestly, the way you say something true when you think the person in front of you is capable of hearing it. The woman was quiet. It was a particular kind of quiet. Owen had known people who went quiet because they were angry, and people who went quiet because they were dismissive, and people who went quiet because they were thinking. This was the third kind. She was receiving what he had said, actually receiving it, and not rushing to answer before she had done that properly. "Yes," she said finally. "I could have." An aide appeared at her shoulder, a young dragon in a formal gray uniform who had come through the side door so quickly and quietly that Owen had not heard him arrive. The aide leaned close and spoke in a low voice directly beside her ear. Owen watched the aide's expression while he whispered. It was the expression of someone delivering a message they were not sure how to frame, glancing at Owen once, then away, then back, in the way people do when the subject of the message is standing right there. The aide finished, straightened, gave Owen a look of complete and genuine disbelief, then arranged his face back into something neutral and stepped back. Owen looked between them. "What?" he said. The woman looked at him with those gold eyes, steady, deep, carrying that long weight behind them. "He is telling you who I am," she said. Owen looked at her. At the gold scales along her jaw. At the eyes that had no white in them. At the way every single person in this waiting room, guards, staff, patients, all of them, was watching her with the specific quality of attention that people reserve for things that are both powerful and unpredictable. He was quiet for a moment. He thought about the walk. About the rain. About 2 hours and 50 minutes and a hatchling with a hitch in its breathing. He exhaled through his nose. "Right," he said. Then he said, "You still could have helped earlier." The silence that followed was a different kind of silence entirely. Nobody in the waiting room moved. The aide looked like he had briefly stopped breathing. One of the security guards appeared to be studying something very interesting on the wall beside him. Sovara, Queen of Varenhold's Eastern Dominion, one of the oldest living dragons on the continent, a figure before whom city officials chose their words with extreme care, stood completely still. And said nothing. Not because she had no answer ready. Not because she was angry. But because the human standing in front of her in a soaked shirt with empty cold hands had said something entirely true, and she had spent too long being someone who did not pretend otherwise. The back door opened. The doctor appeared in the doorway. "The hatchling is stable," he said. "The fever is responding to treatment." Owen sat down in the nearest chair. Put his face briefly in his hands. Then looked up. Sovara had not moved. She was still watching him with those gold eyes, and in them, if you looked carefully, something had shifted. Something that had been measuring and distant and held carefully in place had come slightly undone. "Stay," she said. Not a command. Not quite a request. Owen looked at her for a moment. Then he stayed. The waiting room had emptied around them without anyone saying it should. It happened the way things happen around people with authority, not through direct instruction but through the quiet understanding that the space was needed. Staff found reasons to be in other rooms. The remaining patients were guided, gently and efficiently, to a secondary waiting area down the hall. The aide in the gray uniform took a position near the side door and became very still, the way trained people become still when they are present but not meant to be noticed. Within a few minutes, it was just Owen and Sovara. And the plastic chairs. And the pale blue light. And the sound of the rain still coming down outside the front windows. Owen had found a dry paper towel from a dispenser near the wall and was pressing it against his forearms, which had gone from cold to that deep uncomfortable ache that comes after cold. His shirt was still damp. He was tired in a way that had settled into his bones somewhere around the second kilometer and had not left since. Sovara sat across from him. Straight-backed, still, hands folded in her lap. She looked exactly as composed as she had when she walked in. If the conversation at the desk had unsettled her, she had put it somewhere it did not show. Almost somewhere it did not show. Owen had noticed, before he sat down, in the moment after he said what he said, that her hands had not been folded then. They had been at her sides, and something in the line of her shoulders had been different. Just for a moment. Then it was gone and she was composed again. He did not mention it. He looked at her and waited. Sovara spoke first. "The hatchling's name is Rin," she said. Owen looked up. "He is not a stray," she continued. Her voice was level and clear. "He is not lost in the way an abandoned animal is lost. He is a hatchling of noble bloodline, young, fast, and apparently more skilled at slipping past security than anyone in my dominion would like to admit." A very brief pause. "He has been missing for 3 days." Owen was quiet for a moment. 3 days, he said. "Yes. And nobody found him." "Many people were looking," Sovara said. "I was among them. I have been searching the city personally, without an escort, without announcement, because I did not want to cause alarm among the public. A missing noble hatchling, if it becomes known, creates a particular kind of panic. I preferred to find him quietly." Owen turned this over. "You found his trail near 7th Market," he said. It was not really a question. 2 hours before you entered the alley," Sovara said. "I had narrowed the area but not the exact location. I was moving carefully through the streets around the market when you came through the alley from the depot side." She met his eyes. "I was across the street when you found him." Owen nodded slowly. "So you saw the whole thing," he said. "From the beginning." "Yes." He looked at her. "And you waited." Sovara held his gaze. "I have encountered many situations in this city where species other than dragons have come across hatchlings in difficulty. Most hand them to the nearest authority and leave. Some ignore them entirely. A few," she paused and something moved briefly in her expression, "have used them. As leverage. As a way to obtain something from the Dominion." Her voice did not change much when she said this, but it got slightly quieter. "A hatchling of noble bloodline is not a small thing to find. I needed to understand what you would do with him before I showed myself." The room was very quiet. Owen looked at his hands for a moment. Then he looked back up at her. "I understand that," he said. "I do. What you just described. I understand why that would make you careful. That makes sense." Sovara said nothing, waiting. "But," Owen said, "Rin's fever got worse during the walk. When I found him it was bad. By the time we got here it was worse. The cold rain didn't help. The hour in the waiting room didn't help." He kept his voice even, no anger in it, no accusation. Just the plain shape of what was true. "If you had come forward 30 minutes earlier, that would have been 30 minutes less damage. To him. Not to a test or a situation. To a sick child." He said it and then he stopped. He did not add anything to it or soften it or fill the silence that followed with something easier. Sovara received it. She did not deflect. She did not explain further or offer a counter. She sat with it in the way that very few people sit with direct and honest criticism, fully, without flinching away. "You are right," she said. Owen looked at her. "I misjudged the progression of the fever," she said. "I believed I had more time to observe before intervention was necessary. I was wrong about that. It is not something I will repeat." It was one of the most straightforward admissions Owen had ever heard from anyone. No qualification around the edges. No protective language. Just the plain shape of it said directly. He nodded once. "Okay," he said. And that was that. The strange thing was that after that the conversation became easier. Not immediately, there was a moment of quiet first, the kind that follows something honest and needs a little space before anything else can happen. But then Sovara asked him a question. A real one, not a formal one. She asked why he had kept talking to Rin during the walk. Owen thought about it for a second. Because silence felt wrong, he said. When something is frightened and sick and it can't tell you what it needs, I don't know. Talking seemed better than nothing. Like at least it could hear that someone was there. Sovara was quiet for a moment. Young dragons orient to sound when they are ill, she said. A calm voice, consistent, close, slows the distress response. It is something dragon mothers do instinctively with hatchlings during fever. She looked at him. What you did without knowing it was medically correct. Owen stared at her. The terrible jokes included, he said. Something shifted at the corner of Sovara's mouth. Very small. Very brief. The jokes were not ideal, she said. But the voice was what mattered. I'll take it, Owen said. They talked for a while after that. Not about politics or the Dominion or the complicated history between humans and dragons in Varenhold. Just about things. Sovara asked about humans, about warm-blooded instincts, about how Owen had known to use pressure on the hatchling's back, about whether the constant talking was a human thing or an Owen thing. Owen said he thought it was mostly an Owen thing. He asked her what it was like to search a city alone, without guards, without anyone knowing who she was. Whether it felt strange. She considered the question seriously before answering. Clarifying, she said finally. Owen nodded like he understood that. There was a particular quality to the silence between them now, not the silence of two strangers waiting, but the silence of two people who had said difficult things to each other and come out the other side of it and were now simply present. It was not a comfortable silence exactly. But it was an honest one. Owen was looking at the back door when it opened. A nurse stepped out, a young dragon with pale blue-green scales and a clipboard, who looked briefly startled to find the waiting room containing only two people and one of them being the dragon queen. She recovered quickly. The hatchling is awake, she said. She looked at her clipboard, then back up, and there was something slightly uncertain in her expression, like she was not entirely sure how to phrase what came next. He is asking for, she paused, the warm human. The room was very still. Owen blinked. Me? You are the only human present, the nurse said carefully. Owen looked at the door. Then back at the nurse. He's asking for me by name? He does not know your name, the nurse said. He is saying, in the way very young hatchlings speak, which is not always complete, he is saying warm human. He has said it 4 times now. He will not settle. The nurse glanced at Sovara, a quick, careful glance, and then back at her clipboard. Owen stood up slowly. He turned to look at Sovara. She was looking at him. Not with the composed, measuring expression she had worn since she lowered her hood. Not with the careful stillness of someone controlling what they showed. Something in that control had come undone, quietly, without drama, and what was underneath it was not what anyone in her court would have recognized. It was soft. Genuinely, simply soft, in the way that things become soft when they are moved by something they did not expect and do not have a prepared response to. A hatchling who had been carried through 4 kilometers of cold rain by a stranger had woken up asking for that stranger by the only name he had for him. Sovara looked at Owen, this tired, soaked, ordinary human man with empty hands and a damp shirt, and for a long, quiet moment she said nothing at all. She did not need to. Nobody made an announcement. There was no official statement from the Eastern Dominion. No city broadcast. No press release with Sovara's seal at the top. That was not how she operated. She had spent a very long time understanding that the loudest declarations were usually the ones that meant the least, and that real things, things that actually stuck, moved differently. Quietly. Person to person. Without anyone directing them. So nobody announced anything. And the story spread anyway. It started at the clinic. The nurse who had delivered the message about Rin told a colleague on the next shift. Not as gossip exactly, more as the kind of thing you share because it sits with you and you need to put it somewhere. A human walked in out of the rain carrying a hatchling he found in an alley. Refused to leave the desk. The Dragon Queen was sitting in the waiting room the whole time and he told her she should have helped sooner. The colleague told someone else. That someone told the elderly dragon woman who ran the tea shop on Crestline Avenue, who told every single person who came in for the next 2 weeks with the particular energy of someone who has found a story that deserves to travel. She told it the way good stories should be told, without exaggeration because the plain version was already enough. A man. A sick hatchling. Cold rain. 4 kilometers on foot. And at the end of it, a human standing at a desk with his hands flat on the counter, saying quietly that he was not leaving. The story moved through Varenhold the way true stories move, not in a straight line, not all at once, but in the slow spreading way that water moves through dry ground. It changed slightly with each telling, the way all stories do. Some versions made Owen taller. Some versions had him shouting at the receptionist, which was not true at all and would have made Owen uncomfortable to hear. Some versions did not mention Sovara until the very end, which was closer to how it had actually felt in the room. But the center of every version stayed the same. A man found a sick child and did not walk away. Owen went back to work. His shift started at the usual time, 2 days after the night at the clinic. He showed up at the depot in clean clothes with his regular bag and his regular boots and said good morning to the same people he always said good morning to. Nobody on his shift knew what had happened, or if they did, nobody said anything because Owen had the kind of quiet manner that did not invite the kind of conversation that starts with "so I heard about you." He sorted cargo. He fixed a manifest error. He ate his lunch at the usual time. He was ordinary about it in a way that was completely genuine, because to Owen there was nothing extraordinary to be ordinary about. He had found a sick child. He had gotten it to a doctor. That was a thing that needed doing and he had done it. The fact that the child was a dragon and the doctor had required some persistence and there had apparently been a queen in the waiting room, none of that changed the basic shape of what had happened. He went home. He slept. He went back to work. But the city remembered. 3 days after the night at the clinic, Owen stopped at his usual corner on the way to his shift. There was a covered cup sitting on the low wall beside the lamppost where he sometimes paused to check his phone. Hot tea, he could tell from the steam coming from the small gap in the lid. He looked around. The dragon-owned tea shop was 20 meters up the street. The elder who ran it, a broad, slow-moving dragon with dark red scales and a permanent expression of mild suspicion toward the world, was standing in his doorway. When Owen looked at him, he simply nodded once and went back inside. Owen stood there for a moment. Then he picked up the tea, said a quiet thank you toward the doorway that the elder was definitely pretending not to hear, and kept walking. It happened again the next morning. And the one after that. He stopped questioning it. A week later, a dragon family stopped him on the street. He did not know them, had never seen them before. A mother and father, both with the warm brown scales common in the southern districts, and 2 small hatchlings clinging to their parents with the wide-eyed intensity of young things in an unfamiliar place. The father stepped forward and placed a closed fist against his own chest, then bowed, a formal gesture that Owen did not know the meaning of but could feel the weight of clearly enough. The mother said simply, "Thank you for what you did." Owen said he had not done very much. The mother looked at him in a way that suggested she disagreed but was too polite to argue. The 2 small hatchlings stared at him with enormous eyes. One of them reached out one small claw toward his jacket sleeve, not grabbing, just touching, the way very young things investigate the world, and then pulled it back and hid behind its mother. Owen smiled at it. The family moved on. He stood on the pavement for a moment after they left, hands in his pockets, watching them go. Then he went to work. Rin recovered fully. This took 11 days, longer than a normal case of scale fever, because the cold rain and the delay had let the fever run further than it should have before treatment began. But the medical staff were skilled and Rin was young and strong underneath the illness, and on the 11th day the doctor signed the discharge with the satisfied expression of someone whose work had gone well. Rin was returned to the Eastern Dominion under Sovara's direct care. He went back energetically and loudly and with a great deal of interest in everything around him, which was apparently entirely normal for him and explained perfectly well how he had managed to slip past 4 layers of security in the first place. The staff who had cared for him were relieved and fond and slightly exhausted. The one thing he kept asking for, in the broken and enthusiastic speech of a young hatchling who was feeling much better, was the warm human. Sovara heard this. She did not say anything about it to anyone. But 2 weeks after Rin's return, she sat at her desk in the Eastern Dominion with a document in front of her and wrote for a long time. When she was done, she passed it to her senior administrative aide with instructions for it to be processed through the interagency channels as a standard policy update. The aide read it. He looked up. She was already looking at something else. The policy was filed quietly into Varenhold's interspecies medical framework, a single clean paragraph stating that any individual of any species who brought an injured or ill dragon hatchling to a registered medical facility in the city would receive immediate assistance. No documentation required. No waiting period. No intake category. Immediate. Inside the Eastern Dominion's administrative records, where policy updates were filed under internal code names that the public never saw, it was listed as 3 words. The Moro Standard. Owen was never told. He would not have wanted a name on it. That was Sovara's assessment, made quietly and without discussion, based on nothing more than 45 minutes in a waiting room and 4 kilometers of observation in the rain. She was confident in the assessment. 6 weeks after the night at the clinic, on a Thursday evening, Owen came home from his shift and found a small package on his doorstep. Plain cloth wrapping, folded neatly. No label. No sender's mark on the outside. It was small enough to fit in one hand. He brought it inside and set it on the table and looked at it for a moment. Then he unwrapped it. Inside was a pendant. A single scale, carved with precision from deep gold material that caught even the dim light of his kitchen in a warm and luminous way. On the back, pressed cleanly into the surface, was a seal, small, detailed, unmistakable. The Eastern Dominion mark. He recognized it from the sign at the clinic, from the family's gesture on the street, from the formal documents he had briefly seen when the aide had appeared at Sovara's shoulder that night. He turned it over in his hands. He did not know the full meaning of it. He did not know the history behind it, the tradition, how rarely it was given, what it had meant to every dragon who had ever received one. He did not know it had been given only to those the Dominion considered family. He just knew it was from her. He held it for a long moment in the quiet of his kitchen. Then he stood up, put on his jacket. The same jacket he had wrapped around a pale and shivering hatchling in a rainy alley 6 weeks ago, still faintly marked where the small claws had gripped, and slipped the pendant into the pocket. He walked to the door. Opened it. The city was outside, humming the way it always hummed, loud and lit and full of itself, going about its business the way it always did, paying no particular attention to one ordinary man stepping out of an ordinary building on an ordinary street. Owen Marsh walked to work. The pendant sat warm in his pocket. And somewhere in the Eastern Dominion, a hatchling with fully recovered bright scales and far too much energy for the staff around him looked up from what he was doing and said, for no particular reason and with complete certainty, the only name he had for the person he was thinking about. Warm human. The aide nearby smiled despite himself. Outside the city moved. And in the quiet way that real things last, not in announcements, not in headlines, not in anything loud at all, something had changed in Varenhold that would not change back.